I think, as we just heard, there was really only one verdict to be had here. The evidence on this was overwhelming. It shows that, not only do we have the forensic capability to prove these cases, we've got a will to prosecute anybody who's going to be even attempting to bomb or conduct any types of attacks here in the United States. And I think just as importantly, we have the technologies and the will to prevent these things going in the future.
Sir, talk to me about the technologies. What are they? What sets them apart from some technologies that may be used in other parts of the world?
Well, I think the United States is the foremost leader in the development of these technologies that can detect explosives and these events before they occur. We've got the law enforcement capability and the will to deploy technologies such as explosive trace detection, bomb dogs, all sorts of devices that can be put into place to prevent incidents like the Boston Marathon bombing. And we've demonstrated that in the past. We've got a very strong security apparatus here in the United States that can be applied to prevent situations like this in the future.
Mr. Liscouski, do folks who are attending a marathon or some other public event, do they give up something? Do they give up some of their liberties in the sake of being safe, as Commissioner Safer alluded to?
You know what? We all do. And I think it's a price that we're willing to give up for a safer society. It's not a question of giving up safety. I think it's a question of people recognizing the fact that the world is changing, and we have to be a part of that change in terms of a very proactive approach. People are a part of the security apparatus. This is not just a law enforcement or security apparatus responsibility. Every individual has a responsibility to report things that are anomalous or things that they think need to be reported to authorities for following up. Now we're talking about terrorism, but we've had the same responsibility in high crime areas or any place where we live, that we want to make sure we can raise our children and enjoy the freedoms we have. So I don't see it as we're not giving anything up. I think this is really becoming more participating in the process.
Mr. Liscouski, what type of reset does this mean for the Department of Homeland Security when you have an incident like this? It happened in Boston, but there are ripple effects across the entire United States.
So it does show that, we are vulnerable, right? And that's part of being in a free society. We have, we can't lock everything down, and we're not going to watch every single person, and people are going to get under the radar. And that's what's going to happen with lone wolf type of attacks such as this. That's the nature of these types of attacks and why they're potentially vulnerable and threatening to us. So it's not a reset as much as this is a demonstration of what these types of attacks can be for the future. But the good news is, again, we have the capabilities and technologies that we can deploy to prevent them. We're never going to prevent every single one of them. That's just the unfortunate aspect of how these attacks can occur. But we can reduce the impact of them. We can lessen the severity. We can do things that are going to prevent, future incidents such as this.
Sir, aside from the technology, what does the Department of Homeland Security have at its disposal to keep Americans safe at an event of this magnitude?
Well, this is a layered approach, right? This has got to be a system of technologies and people and processes. It's just not one standalone silver bullet approach. So it's information sharing. It's making sure that the public gets information back to the authorities of people that they think might be suspects in something like this. It's making people being part of the equation to identify things that are out of place, as we saw in the Times Square bombing. That prevented a significant tragedy in Times Square several years ago. And then working with local law enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security has a number of programs that they're putting out to local law enforcement, not just on bomb detection, but on looking at identifying homegrown violent extremists. There's a whole societal aspect of this to ensure that we can identify people who haven't acted yet and maybe still pretty far from acting, but yet are showing behaviors that they are maybe more violent tendencies and extremist tendencies, and they have to be reported back.
Mr. Liscouski, you mentioned information sharing. I would imagine across the entire spectrum, the federal, state, and municipal level. How key is that?
It's critical. I mean, everything is local. There's no such thing as just a national infrastructure for information sharing, because at the end of the day, these events occur on the street in a locality someplace, whether they be Boston, New York, or some suburban location out in the Midwest. So the local law enforcement apparatus needs to have the information at the national level. It's critical that information gets pushed down to the operators, to the people who are actually on the street that can do something about it. Equally as important, that information has to be shared up the chain, because information that might be identified as a fractional piece of information that could ultimately fill in a bigger piece of a puzzle, that has to be shared back up. And that's what's going to be observed on the street, too, by local law enforcement and security. So it's got to be bidirectional. It can't be singularly just information sharing from the national level down. It's got to be piped up, and then it's got to be put into a bigger picture to understand what that information means. The good news is we have those capabilities.